All right. I can't tell you how excited I am about this. This has been a really fun project that I've been working on and getting ready for. Before I start anything else, I talked back and forth with Beth a little bit about just explaining what she's doing here, and so the students understand why she's here.
Mhm.
Great. Well, thanks everyone for letting me join today. I work at a company which you all are very familiar with called Owl Labs, and we make the owl that's in your room. And I work on the product development side, which means trying to figure out what's next. So one of the really important things for us is to actually see how people are using the owl in the real world. So actually being able to sit in on your class today and see how you use it is super helpful. So thanks very much.
You're welcome very much. Change the view here. Okay. So it focuses on whoever's speaking. I'm going to switch to, well, there we go.
Well, great.
All right.
I'm Will Weaver, and I'm super happy to be here. You've read some of my work, one of my short stories. You saw a movie adaptation. Just happy to answer any questions about the story or the movie. And we have kind of a little bonus feature. I rang up the director of Sweetland, who is responsible for the movie, essentially. And he's going to join us at some point and say hello and answer questions as well. So I guess just as a introduction, there is life. And I write out of life. I write out of experiences and historical events and family events. And those things become fiction. I adapt them into fiction, into stories and novels. And what happens to them from there is anyone's guess. I never know who's going to read a story of mine, be it Ali Salim in Los Angeles or you guys up in Winnemac. That's the fun about being a writer. I would just also say there are no dumb questions. Whatever pops into your mind, I'm happy to answer to it. So please don't be shy, okay?
All right. Thank you for that. We were just talking before you all came in that the director, Ali Salim, happened upon the short story, A Gravestone Made of Wheat. Do you want to show them what you showed me behind you?
Yes, I'm up in my little study here in Bemidji, Minnesota, so I'm not so far from you guys, but on the wall here is the cover, a magazine cover. I've got it framed because I thought it was just a beautiful illustration. You can see the field of wheat and the wheat arranged in a cross. And obviously we know what that's all about. But this was the Sunday magazine for the Minneapolis Tribune. And Ali Salim was a film director in the Twin Cities at that time. He read the story, and as he jokes, he thought, wow, that wouldn't be hard to make into a film. We'll get some old people in a farm and we'll make a movie. But he'll have some good stories about getting that made. And I'm just going to turn around and show you the poster, the original movie poster here that was on theaters across the country. So lots of stuff happened from that one little story that you read.
Awesome. Nikan, do you want to ask the first question?
Sure. What inspired you to write A Gravestone Made of Wheat?
Well, that is the best and I think most obvious question. A great place to start. When I was really quite young, and I can't pinpoint it because it was a kind of a half a memory. It was Thanksgiving or Christmas family type of event. And my grandfather, who was a farmer, as was my father, my grandfather was telling a story about way back in the day. And this would have been 1920s or earlier, when in his part of the prairie of North Dakota, this farmer was unmarried, a bachelor farmer, and he was too busy in his mind to go out and look for a wife. So he sent a letter back to the old country, meaning Norway, Sweden, etc., wondering if there would be someone, a young woman who would come over and marry him. Well, as it turns out, a woman did. And this is a true story. And she came over, and the two, the bachelor farmer and the immigrant woman, were supposed to wait and then get married properly. But they didn't wait. And they apparently scandalized the community a bit. Now, about that time, my grandfather was telling that story. He saw me listening and he stopped. He stopped telling that story because he thought it might be inappropriate for my young ears. And he never did finish the story, and time passed on. But I came back to that years later, and I wanted to kind of finish it in my own mind. What must that have been like, that story? And so that eventually, I started with real life, and I ended up with fiction.
That's great. That's awesome. Colton.
Okay. You said that you're up in your study right now, so that kind of leads into this next question. Is there like a place or a time that you prefer writing?
You know, I like to have a quiet place to get started on a project, a short story or a novel, but once it's rolling, once I'm really in a groove, I can write anywhere. I can be in a coffee shop. I could be at a holiday station writing. And if I've got a really good story and things are going well, but quiet space is good. You know, writing is an odd business. It's very solitary to begin with. And then when it gets published, it can become very public. I've rattled around coast to coast signing autographs and going to movie openings and so on. And it's not something I ever set out to do, but it just evolved from the stories and some of the things that I've written.
Awesome, thank you.
Grace.
How long did it take you to write the story?
You know, it varies story to story and book to book. I have a big novel actually that is appropriate for northwestern Minnesota, and it's called Red Earth, White Earth. Red Earth, White Earth. And it has a lot to do with the White Earth Indian Reservation and who owns the land and that sort of thing. That took me over 2.5 years to write. That's full time. Short stories go a lot faster, ideally, and probably Gravestone is, I think, back probably a couple of full weeks, you know, full days, 2 weeks for that story. And but when I got to the end of it, it sounds kind of wimpy, but I got to the end of it, I cried. I just knew it was good. I knew I had done something important here, and that turned out to be the case.
Yeah. I think the end of that story is very, very poignant, and I agree. I think it's a very good, very important story.
And we will talk about endings, differences in endings here, I'm sure, at some point in our.
Very well, between the story and the.
Yes.
We arranged our questions, story questions first, and then.
Great. Mm-hmm.
Jonna, you have a follow-up question from Grace?
Yeah. Did you intend for it to be just a short story, or did you like have an idea to make it like an actual like full book, or?
Well, that's a really good question because it wanted to be a full book. It wanted to be a novel. It kept trying to just explode out of the frame I had it in. But if you think back to the story you read, it has sort of bookends to it. It starts one way and end one way, and then the middle part is one big long flashback. Now, you're not supposed to be able to do that in the short story form, but I did it, and it worked. So I used those sort of bookend structures to hold it down to the short story level and not let it grow into a novel.
Colby. You with us, Colby?
Why? Yeah, I'm here. Why did you write about the specific time frame?
That time frame, as I mentioned earlier, my grandfather telling that story about the immigrant days, and that's a big part of my family history. Coming from Norway, my grandfather immigrated from Norway when he was 4 years old. Landed here when he was about 1900 and started a farm out in northeastern North Dakota. Then eventually came over to Minnesota, up in the Argyle, Oslo area, up beyond you guys. So that period is such a rich and meaningful one in terms of the history of where we live. And by we, I mean Minnesotans here. And it's family history, so I thought it deserved attention. That's why I wrote about that time period.
Colson, kind of a follow-up question.
Yeah, so you talked about, you got like the main like structure of your story from like true events, but was there any research that followed with like with your part of the story, with everything you added and the characters' lives and being from Norway and stuff?
Well, yes, and I'm thinking when Ali Salim joins us, he can talk about research as well. The whole matter of the war, and we're talking about World War I. So the story is set after World War I. Now, World War I was in 1916, 17, and 18. So my story is set in the 20s and afterwards, at least where it begins. And the war, World War I, was against Germany. And so in America and in the Midwest, there was a lot of prejudice against Germans. Well, there happened to be a lot of German immigrants. They had come from Germany for land in the Midwest, just as Norwegians and Swedes and Finns had come to score some of that good farmland that we have. So here are Germans living here, but the war over in Europe is against Germany. So there was a lot of suspicion and prejudice against Germans, and in fact, more than I understood. And it was Ali Salim, the director, who really was surprised as well, as he did research. And some of the stuff he came up with just was surprising, of how hard it was for Germans living here in the Midwest during that period.
So, thank you.
Speaking of Ali, he's just joined us.
Hello, brother.
Hello, Brother Will. How are you?
Good, good.
Good.
I
I can't seem to figure out where the camera is. It's here? How does that look? Like,
I think you're good. Is he good?
Yep, we can see him. I'm trying to find the best way of showing both of you on my screen for the students, but we were just talking about the research that went into writing the story and making this movie, and I think it's a good spot to piggyback off of what research you did in producing this movie.
Ali, I'll just preface this by saying we were talking about anti-German sentiment, and I didn't realize it was as bad as it was.
my mother is from a German family and grew up in southern Minnesota, not exactly the area where the story takes place, but close enough. And she was actually a lot of my research. She's only slightly younger than the story. She would be the age of Olaf and Inga's children. And she told me stories about, the Pinkerton Guards, who went around southern Minnesota, going into churches specifically, making sure that everybody was speaking English and not German.
Mhm.
And if the minister was speaking German, he was flagged by the Pinkerton guards to the governor of Minnesota, saying that he was probably a rebel rouser.
Mm.
And she told me other stories about brothers, not only, dividing lines of friends, but brothers, one of whom went to fight for the US and one of whom went back to Germany to fight for Germany.
Hmm.
It's incredible. But, mistrust of people who were German. And it was coming off of, there's a tiny little joke in the film about the Chinese Exclusionary Act, which was absolutely true, that just prior to this hatred of Germans, we wouldn't let Chinese into the country because it's always got to be somebody. And I
Mhm.
noticed that they always have a mustache. The bad guy always has a mustache. So
Yes, yes, yes. Well, that was a just a great answer, a follow-up to me saying it existed, but you took it to the next level. And that's essentially the process that we have gone through, Ali and I. I wrote the story and he took it to the next level. He essentially made a novel out of my short story by expanding it. So I also showed them, Ali, and over on my wall behind me, can you see it? That is the original magazine cover, the Minneapolis Tribune, in which you read the story. And so
yeah,
they have
which
the
really
back.
moved me.
They have the
I have
background.
to let the dog in. He's very impatient. Sorry.
Yes, of course. All right.
This is fine. We've got two or three more questions
Yes, let's go ahead.
about the story, and then we've got several about the movie too. So, Will, do you want to ask yours?
Yes, go ahead. Mhm.
Earlier, you said that your short story wanted to be a novel. You were joking about that. Was there any backstory to that that didn't make it into the published version?
That's no one's ever asked me that question. Was there backstory that I left out? Not so much. I mentioned that I used the bookend, kind of framing the story to kind of hold it down, keep it from escaping and growing. And that's one of the toughest things about writing a short story is to keep it short. It's so easy to let things expand and take this thread and unravel it and so on. But a good short story tightens it down and finds a way to say a lot in a short space. So no, I made sure to keep those other stories out. And I guess I let Ali Salim add them later.
It's interesting. I think that short story is perfection. And in some ways, maybe I should have left it alone because it is perfection. But in other ways, I think what I did, there's a famous quote from Ansel Adams, the photographer, who said, "I don't want people to see what I saw when I take a photograph. I want them to feel what I felt."
Hmm.
And I think that was I've said it in public many times, but I got to the end of that story that Sunday morning back in the 1990s, and I sobbed. I didn't drop a tear. I sobbed. There was something so moving about it for me in that moment. And it was more about, I think this feeling needs to translate rather than, I'll get a horse and a plow and a guy and I'll make a movie out of that short story. I wanted to make a movie out of the way I felt when I read that short story.
Great. Yeah. I think, just so my students are aware, I think I want to skip ahead to some different questions and come back to a couple that we had here. But this is maybe an interesting question for Will, especially now that Ali is with us. Is this movie what you envisioned it would be?
Well, I have come to speak about this on many, many occasions and always say that it's part of the territory that there will be changes. No adaptation is an absolute mirror image of the story. So The writer has to understand that going into it, and ideally trust the director and the film people to do a good job. And Ali could have added Russian spies and to this, but he didn't, because I trusted him that he would do right by it. So my summary of that question is, the same heart is still beating in the movie that beat in the story, and for that I'm pleased and grateful.
So, I mean, ultimately, what you're saying is that you weren't involved in the screenwriting process at all, or were there some, did you consult with Ali, or did any of that? I'm curious about the process.
Well, yes, happy to speak to that. That process, and I've been through that a couple of times, one with the novel Red Earth, White Earth, and a CBS television movie. The original writer can be shut out completely, or she can be involved deeply in it. With Sweetland, I was involved early on, looked at a couple drafts. Ali was wonderful about saying, what do you think about this? Or we can't have these three things, but we can have one of them. What would be your choice? And eventually I came to think, I trust Ali to do this. And there's an old joke, speaking of jokes, that a donkey is a horse made by a group.
Okay.
Yes, you get something that's lesser. The more people involved, the lesser it becomes. The shorter the legs, we could say. So we end up with a donkey with short legs and big ears when you were looking for a beautiful stallion. And I thought, I think Ali needs to do this by himself. I'd come to trust him like a brother by then. And I was happy to say, go in peace, and we'll meet at the other end too.
I think I also, and maybe this is a filmmaker defensiveness, but I also say I didn't make any changes to the short story. If you open the book, you'll see it's exactly the same as it was when it was first published. So it's a process of how do you turn it into a different medium? How do you make that short story into a painting? Jim Bockham tried to, and I think he did a very good job. Right? But it's a very different story, because painting is a very different medium. So, yeah.
Well, my metaphor is the short story grew into a novel, and you made the novel. And that's fine. Another way of looking at it is that I had the core of the story, and Ali added rings and made it larger, adding characters, adding subplots, and it all worked just fine. But in the end, the same heart was still there.
As you once said, well, your short story went away to boarding school and came back with the same heart beating within, different clothes and a few body piercings, but.
Do you have a follow-up?
I kind of came up with this question earlier when it was just Will here, but this could work for Ali as well. So Will, you were talking about how when you finished your short story that you were like very emotional. I was curious, this works for Ali as well, if you guys ever go back and read your short story or watch your movie, like if you guys ever do that often or not.
Well, I'll jump in here. There's another joke, be careful what you wish for in life. And Ali and I have watched our movie many times, and at various presentations and schools and so on. And it's just part of the territory once you have something that's a success. But I will say, no matter how many times I've watched Sweetland, I always come away seeing something I didn't see before. I always come away satisfied. And I always come away, and here's another inside joke, I always come away missing my train. I'll let Ali
I,
speak to that.
I have to go. I was hoping you would get that joke in the 10 minutes
Okay,
that I was available.
Good.
So thank you. I'm sorry that I have to run, but I appreciate the time and I appreciate your paying attention to our film and this beautiful story.
Right. See you.
Super. Thank you very much.
Take care.
Well, I'll finish up the train joke. You remember the scene inside the train, it's rattling along, you hear the whistle and so on, and she comes to the train station, Inga does. But here's my question, do we ever see a real train?
No.
I don't think you do.
No, no. And a train was a very big deal in the short story. Remember, she's arriving from Europe and the farmer Olaf goes to meet her with his horse and wagons, very big deal at the station. Train comes in, this big, beautiful steam train. So my joke is, as a writer, I can have anything in the world in terms of budget. I have an unlimited budget. Yes, I can make it up. It exists. But Ali works in the real world. He would have to pay for a train and all that goes with it. And this was an independent film production. And the train would have cost something like $100,000 to move from somewhere. And it's just not possible. So he had to kind of fake the train. And really, he did a pretty good job because not many people miss it. But I do miss my big, beautiful steam train arriving at the station.
We had a few questions as a class about specific changes between the story and the movie. It's too bad that Ali couldn't stay a little bit longer for these types of questions. But one thing that we bumped on right away when we started watching the movie is the change between Olaf dying and instead of Inga dying. Can you speak to that? Can you talk about what was the discussion behind that change?
You know, that was the biggest change certainly in the movie, the flip-flopping of those characters. And I confess, when I saw it and I actually read the script first, I went, wow, is this going to work at all? And again, it's part of that process of moving, as I'll say, from a short story to a novel. Ali just wanted bigger issues, a bigger canvas there than that really tight, perfect ending in the story where she's buried in a field. That may have been almost too small for the movie he was looking for. But yes, I wish we could have had Ali speak to that. It's a complicated matter, but in the end, I think it did work.
And I appreciate that it worked out that way because I'm a big fan of the movie Twister, and to have Lois Smith in the movie was
Oh, thank you. Yes, yeah. Mm-hmm.
was pretty great. And I'm going to jump around a little bit again, class.
Sure.
I just mentioned one of the actresses in the film. Jonna, did you want to ask your question about the actors
Oh, the question, okay.
towards the bottom?
Did you get to meet any of the the main characters? Like, did you like the
Indeed, yes. And they couldn't have been nicer people. They appreciated the story. And they said of the film, we often work in bigger budget pictures, but there's there's a lot of car chases and exploding petroleum products or aliens landing. And they said it's so nice to work in a like a more of a real kind of story. They kept using that word real. This feels so real. And we had Ned Beatty, who's famous for Deliverance and other movies, and Lois Smith, an older actress, and Alan Cumming, who's really everywhere. Tim Guinea, you'll see him, who played Olaf. You'll see him in a lot of cable films and so on. So Alex Kingston, yes, just really nice people.
Great. Now I have to figure out where to tie it back in. Colton, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, the movie one?
Yeah, the argument.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So about a half an hour into the movie, Inga and Olaf have this like really emotional argument, and Inga starts going off in Norwegian, and the subtitles don't translate that for us. So like,
Yes, yes.
in that,
We, excuse me, I'll catch my throat. That was an interesting decision, director's decision. Do we want subtitles? And actually, she would be speaking German there, right? Because she's from Germany. But so she had to learn German as much as she could, like within a month or so, to know her lines and stuff. So some of it is sort of fakey German, but we think that people could just tell by the scene what the emotion is and what the feeling is. So we decided to go without subtitles. I think it was a cool decision.
Yeah.
yeah, you can kind of understand what she's saying with your body language,
Exactly. Thank you.
if you guys knew.
Yeah. A really interesting side story to that. Last school year, I had a foreign exchange student from Germany, and when we got to this scene, I got really excited because I assumed that she was speaking in German for that scene, and asked if she could translate, and she's like, I mean, either A, it's Norwegian, or B, it's not the best,
Yes.
not the best German, I guess, but she struggled trying to translate that for us. So
Well, there you have it. There's the inside answer to that. It was and it wasn't German. She did the best she could, but again, she had like 30 days. This happens very fast sometimes at casting, and jump in and start playing a part. And she had to do the best she could. And but yes, someone who speaks German would see that, hear that right away.
Will, do you want to ask your question?
Sure. In the movie, would you like to share with us any Easter eggs, like objects or things said maybe in Norwegian or German that had different meanings outside of the film, maybe in reference to the book or your own personal life? And on top of that, I did hear that you made a cameo in the film, and I was wondering where that would be.
Yes. So say again about language issues. The first part of your question.
I was wondering if she said anything in like German or Norwegian that would reference your own personal life, maybe the writers, the producers' own personal life, like that.
Will was explaining to me yesterday what a movie Easter egg is, and that's kind of what his question is
Right.
telling.
You know, not really. There's no really inside references to my life necessarily. But yes, I did have a cameo, and it's kind of halfway along. We call it the magic lantern scene. That is to say, that Alan Cumming has that kind of early slide projector thing, and he's showing these glass plate slides in the hayloft. And he loves all the newest inventions, and he's not really a farmer. He's an artist. He shouldn't be a farmer. He's a horrible farmer. And again, that was a character invented by Ali. In the story, he's a guy who passes on the road in a wagon, Franson. Well, Ali expanded him into a major role and cast Alan Cumming. And it's a great role, adds a lot to the movie. But my scene with Alan Cumming was, I'm standing behind him, I'm wearing a hat, and my job is to lean in and look at this slide projector very skeptically and curiously, as if, what in the world is this thing? This thing will never work. And I believe I nailed that scene. Thank you very much.
All right. Another change, or I should say, yeah, another change or addition to the movie that we bumped on towards the end is this notion of potentially losing the farm and the implications of Olaf and Inga being buried there and wanting to keep it for that reason but can't.
Mhm.
I know you've already spoken a few times now about, you know, the movie needs to be fleshed out or expanded, but did you like that change? Did you what are your thoughts about that?
Well, again, I hate to use the word perfect, but I had a perfect ending to the short story. Yet that was the short story. And if we're going to make a film, a big feature film, then maybe we need more. And again, that was Ali's job, to make it even more than it was. We still did get a burial in the field, as I had in my short story. It was different. It was a flip flop, but the scene still was quite strong, I thought.
Yeah. Okay. Jumping back up to Nikon's question, do you want to ask your number 11 on the list?
That's the one. Let me just check really quick again. Oh. How do you feel knowing that a movie was adapted from your story?
Well, number one, it's a great gift to a writer. In some ways, it's every writer's dream to have a movie made of his work. I mentioned this has happened twice. It's not something I set out to do, but I've come to believe, and maybe been proven true, that if I really focus on my writing and write something deeply heartfelt and good, that it will find a place somewhere. People will read it. And again, who knows who will read it, from you guys to Ali Salim or other Hollywood people. So it's a great honor. A writer can make some money on a Hollywood adaptation. But again, this was not Hollywood. This was independent production. The budget, I don't mind talking about it, was $1 million, which sounds like a lot of money, but big feature films these days are $300-500 million. So this was, anyway, in some ways, small potatoes. I got paid enough to buy a nice pickup. Hey, I'm a happy man, yes? And we made something of lasting value. This movie is, I saw an article not long ago. It was in the context of the 100 most underrated movies out there, and Sweetland was in that group. So it's going to be around for a while, unlike some of those big expensive Hollywood movies that are not that good and go away after a couple of weeks.
Okay. A couple more questions before our time runs out. Jumping back into more of the story and publishing type questions, can you explain the process of do you work with editors before publishing, and how that publishing process works?
Yes, with short stories, it's a very simple process. Writers write and send them out to a magazine or a website, wherever, and hope that that publisher, be it electronic or paper, likes them and wants to publish them. With novels, it's different. We usually use an agent. It's more complicated. I write something, finish a draft of the novel, I send it to my literary agent, and that agent then tries to sell it to a publisher. That's how that works. And then at the publisher, there's a person called an editor who is assigned to me. And she will say, okay, I like your novel, but it needs a little work here, it needs a little more depth here, or it needs to be shorter, it needs to be longer. And so she will help me then make it the best novel it can be. That's what editors do at publishing companies.
Casey, are you with us in the Zoom? Do you want to ask your question?
How long have you been publishing stories?
You know, I would say now really most of my life, but as a writer, um, we can start writing at any point. Writing is a life sport, unlike football. We can write, we can publish, and I actually got started slightly late. I didn't publish my first book until I was 35, and so that's 35, 40 years later. So I've made a career of this. I've also been a teacher. I taught at Bemidji State University for quite a few years, taught creative writing and literature. Most writers do have another job. It's hard to make a full-time living being a writer. I've kind of sort of done that on occasion, but really the writing has always been sort of equal to my teaching income.
A side note, I'll be turning 35 next month. So you're saying I still have time if I want
Yes,
to?
Andrew, there's plenty of time.
Okay, good. I think that covers, did you want to, this question actually goes back to the movie, but did you want to ask that last question,
Sure.
Grace?
Who decided the title Sweetland?
Well, there's a question that's overlooked. My short story was entitled A Gravestone Made of Wheat, and that's exactly what the story was about. This couple married, common law marriage all their lives, and they like their privacy, and she is buried in the field and her gravestone is wheat. Well, that title perhaps was a little bit long for a movie marquee, or maybe was a little bit, I don't know, I don't want to call it a downer title, but we have gravestone in it. But Sweetland was maybe a little more upbeat, and that was a loss for me. I would have preferred the original title, but again, that was director's choice, and in the end, it turned out to be fine. I'm okay with it in the end.
Right. That was our last question, and we're about a couple minutes away from 10 o'clock, so we made good time. So we just want to thank you so much for coming in and doing this with us. These students actually read your novel Striking Out last year as well. So they've been reading your work for a couple years now, and I think hopefully have been enjoying it.
We hope so.
Yeah, really fun project to do this, to read the story and watch the movie and to analyze it and talk about it, and especially to talk about it with you. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank
Yes,
you.
thanks a lot. All right, bye-bye.
Bye.
See you later.
Live long and prosper. All right, so I'm gonna stop the recording. Thank you also to Beth for hanging on there with us. I hope that was enjoyable for you.
It was great. I guess I need to go do some reading and watch a movie. But the conversation was great, and I was actually picking up a lot of different things. So not necessarily all the conversation, but how everyone was talking to each other, and how the people at home were talking and the people in the classroom were talking, and that's the things I was focused on. So thanks for that.
That's a pretty typical thing for us. We have some students that are at home distance learning. We have some students that are spaced social distance in the classroom. And I hope that, I guess, your product, the OWL, was able to pick up everybody's questions from all over the classroom. It sounded like Will was able to hear them. So that's good.
Yeah, it was great. Everything was very clear. And I'll just put out there, if you ever want to just write a few thoughts about your experience of using the OWL and, give them to your teacher for him to share. We're always just, interested in learning about what you think as a student versus, just technology being there. So we'd always appreciate that as well.
One thing that I'd like to add in the beginning of class when Will came in and then Ali did, and we were trying to figure out how to put them both pinned on the screen. Big, whatever you like to say. If you wanted to work on making it so you could pin 2 people up on the screen, both half, without having to
Oh.
see.
That's more of a Zoom thing than an owl thing. Because the owl device is just for the classroom.
Camera.
And that's my fault. In the settings, there's a way to remove all those students without their camera turned on. That would have made it a little bit easier. I just forgot where that setting was, and I didn't want to cause everything to do that. So, but that's a good question, and I should have done that. But
No, I picked up on that as well. So thanks for that comment. Actually, it's interesting to see like what Zoom handles versus what Owl might be able to handle. So thanks. Yeah.
thank you. Let's go.
Now we have to go back to the movie.